Hey everyone, so
Do 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 do. Yeah, Fess, what's up? Good, man. How are you?
to talk a little bit about my biggest critiques and concerns for Diablo 4. Now, if you saw the review that we put up yesterday, you'll know that my overall impressions of the game are very good. Like, I quite like D4. I think it's a real solid foundation that they're launching with. And if Blizzard gets the seasons right with meaningful updates, additions, and improvements, I think it has a great chance at longevity. But even without any of that, I still feel pretty satisfied with what we're getting at a base game, what it has to offer. And I am very much so looking forward to playing over the next few weeks. Like, it's gonna be a blast. I absolutely cannot wait. That said, yes, there are some parts of Diablo 4 that I really don't love, I think could use improvement, and some things that I wish were already in the game, but they're not, and so the hope is that they eventually come later down the road. Okay, so let's jump right into it. My first major critique would definitely be the game's difficulty. Overall, it just doesn't feel very challenging. Now, when I mentioned this in the review, people pointed out, hey, well then why did you recommend people play on World Tier 1? So that recommendation is specifically for while playing through the campaign, if and only if your goal is to reach endgame as quickly as possible. If that isn't your goal and you just want a more challenging leveling experience as you play through the story, then yes, absolutely bump it up to World Tier 2. That's gonna make it take longer to kill everything, which will as such have you engaging with every pack of monsters that much more, and it should make combat feel a bit more rewarding. But what I'm actually referring to when I say that the game doesn't feel difficult overall is I'm talking about when you're playing on the highest world tiers. Because yes, once you do finish the campaign, you will want to be jumping and playing in world tiers 3 and 4 as soon as possible, and that is where you're going to be staying, because that is where you actually have access to the endgame activities of nightmare dungeons and hell tides, and it's also how you start getting those higher tiers of items, the sacred items and the uniques. And from our experience so far, playing in those tiers, it really doesn't stay hard for very long. When you first make the jump, and if you're not geared up, your damage and survivability will be a bit low. But then after just a couple of hours and a bump in your item level, quickly becomes a cakewalk. I think the perfect showcase of how easy it is, even in World Tier 4, is just the fact that how quickly we can clear boss fights. Both the end of dungeon bosses that you see, but also the world bosses were dying very quickly and without much difficulty on World Tier 4, while we were not even max level. I mean, the fact that this is happening on the highest world tier, that's a bit of a shame. And the point of this is that even on that highest difficulty, all of those open world encounters really don't take too long before they become something that you just smash through. Since everything in the open world scales to your level, once you get the gear level and you have the account progression, you know, your Paragon boards and all of that, once that gets to a certain point, everything is just super, super easy from that point forward. Now, with that said, the nightmare dungeons are an entirely different story, as those keep pushing higher and higher, and they remain a challenging activity, seemingly all the way up to 100, we're assuming. So this is where we were actually presented with continuous bumps in difficulty. I just kind of wish that the rest of the game, especially all of that open world, and especially the open world bosses, didn't become so trivial so quickly, because there's a lot of content there. Like, the open world is a big bulk of the game. It's one of my favorite parts of the game, and I would have loved if it remained a challenge all the way up to level 100, but as it stands, seems like once you get to around level 60, and especially as you get closer to 70, even on World Tiers 4, the open world is going to become a breeze, and the only challenge is going to be in the nightmare dungeons. Now, my second biggest concern is the fact that we haven't yet mentioned today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Dungeon Fighter Online. This is a free-to-play 2D MMORPG beat-em-up with retro pixel graphics. It combines classic side-scrolling action with RPG elements and is known for its fast-paced gameplay and extensive character customization. In DF FO, you can choose from more than 60 class advancements with unique abilities and progression paths to suit any style. Other features include PvP with ranked matchmaking, where skilled players can compete for recognition. It's also got advanced and Legion dungeons with their own special rewards for clearing. The most recent update to Dungeon Fighter Online, called the Archmage's Hall of Dimensions, is coming out on May 30th. This adds 5 new unique boss monsters that can be played in 4 different difficulties, rewarding special equipment which can be fused, enhancing your characters. If you are new and want to catch up, you can reach level 100 through the fast leveling mode, receiving special missions and rewards for every level, with even more missions available after 100. To learn more about Dungeon Fighter Online and check it out for yourself, go ahead and use my link in the description below. Okay, welcome back. Now let's go ahead and get on to the real second major concern, and that is that the boss fights are too easy. Now this might sound a lot like the first critique, but hold on a second. It is different because I'm actually not referring this time to like the amount of health the bosses have or the amount of damage they do. I'm just specifically talking about boss mechanics. Pretty much every single boss fight in Diablo 4 can be boiled down to 2 things. 1, don't get hit by the melee attack or spell, and 2, don't stand in the fire. If you complete those 2 objectives, you just deal damage to the boss until their health bar reaches 0. Outside of that, the only other real mechanics I ever came across in boss fights, there were 3 of them. 1, you would get these totems that sometimes appeared and they would chain you to the ground. 2, there were some encounters, I think 2 of them, where the play space would shrink over time, making you closer and closer to the boss fight. And then the 3rd type of boss mechanic that I've seen is some invulnerability, where you have to usually kill some sort of structure or some sort of NPCs before you can start damaging the boss again. All 3 of those additional things were showing up very rarely in boss fights. For the most part, pretty much every boss is just a DPS and a survivability check. And there are very few additional layers of mechanics. And I was just really expecting and hoping for a lot more here. You know, since Diablo 3 came out over these past 10 years, there have just been so many other loot games that have showcased some real impressive boss fight mechanics. Other ARPGs, MMOs, and looter shooters that have done this really well. And we've learned that there's just such a wide variety of potential skill checks and fail states and other mechanics, things that you can add to boss fights beyond giving them more health or beyond giving them one-shots or having them deal more damage. What are you talking about, Force? Isn't it all just get rid of the, move out of the fire and attack the boss? No, here's some examples. You can have a boss that debuffs players, one member of the party, or if you're playing by yourself, they'll debuff you and you have to cleanse, or else it'll one-shot you or add a damage over time or make the boss fight more difficult by boosting them up. Having items in the play space or interactables in the environment that you must engage with during certain phases of the boss fight, that's another layer. Requiring precise positioning for certain attacks or phases, or that can even be applied into the debuff thing where these multiple layers of mechanics are stacked on top of each other. And then having things like enrage mechanics, where if you don't meet a specific condition, for example, if you don't get the boss to a certain phase by a set amount of time, the boss gets stronger, making it more difficult. It doesn't have to be a hard fail, but more things to engage with, more mechanics would be great. Now, I'm not saying that boss fights in Diablo 4 have to be to the level of complexity of like MMO raids, right? It doesn't need to be like WoW raids or Final Fantasy 14 raids, or it doesn't even have to be like the mechanics we see in Lost Ark, although I would love some of that splashed in here and there. I just think there's a lot of things that could work really well in Diablo 4 that would add extra layers of difficulty and ways to approach these boss fights that I would appreciate, but just really isn't there. Right now, boss fights in D4 pretty much deal damage, don't get hit by the attack, and don't stand in the fire. That's 99% of the fights that you'll come across when playing in this game. The fact that Liam was like face tanking world bosses, not even with a care in the world, it shouldn't be that way, right? It would be great if it wasn't that way and there was more to it. So I definitely think there's a lot of room for improvement here when they add future bosses down the road. If they could include more skill checks, more fail states, more mechanics, things beyond deal damage and don't get hit. My 3rd major critique would be around the inventory management. So while playing the game, your inventory will fill up very quickly. Usually, anytime I did a major activity, my inventory would be full and I'd have to go back to town, making regular trips to dismantle or sell off whatever I was carrying. If I did a single nightmare dungeon, if I did a round of Tree of Whisper quest, if I went into a Helltide, anytime I did like one solid endgame activity, I would usually have to visit a vendor or the blacksmith. Now, sure, this could just be alleviated by not picking up a lot of items, but honestly, I don't really feel like that's an option, especially with how important yellow gear is in Diablo 4. A lot of times you can find pieces of rare yellow gear that contain the exact stats and bonuses that you want for a build, like plus skills, or if you need your crit or attack speed or whatever you need. Paying attention addition to the yellow drop seems pretty important. It's not like you're just waiting on legendary or above, especially with the imprint system where you can pull legendary aspects out of gear and then put it on rare pieces of gear. That's going to make you pay attention to rare pieces of gear, so I don't foresee me not paying attention to rare pieces of gear, which means I need to pick it up, which means my inventory is constantly filling up. But I think the biggest culprit in what makes inventory management a bit of a pain are the gems. They are just so annoying. They take up a massive amount of space in your bag. So there are 7 different types of gems, categories of gems, and if you're carrying one of each type, they'll just be taking up a fourth of your entire inventory, and that's not even accounting for the fact that there are these 7 types of gems, but there are multiple levels of gems. So you can have like 1, 2, 3 of just the yellow gems and 4 of the red gems. There's so many different gems. What this results in is you either have to keep going back to town to your stash to get rid of them, or you just keep the 7 gem types in your inventory constantly, and you just lose a fourth of your inventory the entire time, which just necessitates more trips back to town. I know I'm going to be picking up gear. It's a gear game. We need to look at gear. We need to see what we get to see if it's an improvement, but just get the gems out of there at least, so I'm not constantly dealing with either dumping them in my stash or losing a fourth of my inventory space. Please, please, please. The next big concern is the cash shop and the microtransactions. So they didn't have it in the review build, but they did give us a preview of it through a press kit. What we learned is that you've got that paid currency. You can buy them in bundles ranging from $2 all the way up to $100. In the $2 to $10 range, if you purchase those, every $1 basically equals 100 currency. But then at the $25 bundle and up, they start adding bonus free currency, with the extra most bonus currency coming from that $100 bundle. So if you're someone who likes getting the best value, you're going to be spending that $100. As for what it is you're buying, well, they have lived up to their words, supposedly, at this point, by just offering cosmetics, a bunch of different bundles. There are a lot of $8 bundles, which will be 3 pieces, things like the Death Throws and the Lion Share set. And then there's anything for the 8-piece bundles ranging from $23 all the way up to $28. These sets include the Death Toll, the Wraith Lord, the Fractured Magic, a lot of different cosmetics, taking up gear slots for every gear slot in each class. There's also cosmetics for the mounts, and then back pieces. There were markings or tattoos, basically. I also believe they sell tombstones, which is just the thing that pops up on the ground when you die. And then on top of that, there were these other purchases called add-ons. The Crypt Hunter add-on gave you a mount skin, a couple of cosmetics, and then 800 platinum. And then you could spend that platinum in the store, I guess, on one of those $8 bundles if you wanted to, or maybe buy some more if you wanted to buy one of those 8-piece $23 to $28 bundles. It's a cash shop. You know, the fact that the highest bundles that we see right now is $28. There are worse cash shops, but again, this is also the cheapest version of Diablo 4, $70. What does it go up to, like $90 or $100 if you want the ultimate highest edition of the game?
Yeah,
so having
$100 for
$30 skin bundles and knowing that we've got a season pass coming out that has 2 paid tiers, it's a lot of extra layers. Now, as I mentioned in the review, this is not a surprise. We knew this was coming, and they have at least lived up to the fact that they're just doing cosmetics, but now actually getting the price points on these things, it's just, when you add it all up, it is a bit of sticker shock. Like, there's a lot going on, but you know, the argument, of course, is you don't have to buy these cosmetics, and the people who do buy cosmetics are going to be the ones supporting these seasonal updates that we're getting. It's I don't know, I don't love it, but I understand that as part of these live service games, this is the fuel that keeps the engine rolling, right? This is the thing that keeps the content coming, because otherwise they'll just take their money, peace out, and see us in 2 to 3 years when they release an expansion, and the updates we would get would be fairly minimal, a la what the seasonal updates were in Diablo 3.
Yep.
And that
No,
would
actually, I
just be
think
the
it's more than
alternative
that, Nick.
situation.
So
So
what do
this
we
is
have?
what we have, this cash shop, even though
I have
those are some pricey
15,
bundles, this is
29
what
of
is
16s
supposedly
alone.
going to be making those seasonal updates that much more extensive, interesting, and have a lot more content. We'll see how that pans out as we get the first couple of seasons here post-release. And then my last major point of criticism, and this is actually probably one of my biggest and just general critiques across all of Diablo 4, is that it just doesn't seem to have a lot of innovation to kind of push the ARPG genre forward. Now, yes, they have built a really solid core game. It is a lot of fun to play. I like the systems. I like everything about playing and spending time with the game. And I love that
maybe
they
just
have
a
this
little.
big seamless open world. They've done a lot well about bringing elements together here, and I think they've made a great core experience. But there have been very few moments that I feel like there was something happening in Diablo 4 that I hadn't really seen in another game. Or what's even more, as kind of mentioned when referring to the kind of limited set of boss mechanics that this game appears to have, it seems like it's even lacking in a lot of areas. This isn't to say that I don't appreciate this really solid, competent ARPG that I enjoy playing and I'm looking forward to playing, that's also open
Hey, what
world,
up, Kim?
that has these MMO light elements. Those are cool. I just suppose I feel like I wish they could have taken some bigger swings.
For
as
real.
I put it
Then again, this
before,
league
or
does have a
tried
couple
few
months
new
left,
things to
but
try to push
Diablo
things
4 comes
forward
out
a little
tomorrow.
bit more. As it is,
So
it does feel like they've played it a little safe. It is a good
that will
safe.
probably cut
It is
in for at least a couple
good thing
weeks.
They built. It's a good product.
Probably
I
do
like
like
it. I'm looking forward to playing it.
75% Diablo 4 and
I guess I
25%
wish I
PoE
would have
for a
had
little
some
bit.
more like, oh wow, look at that moments. And for the most part, I was never really surprised or taken aback by what I saw, as much as I do enjoy and appreciate it. So those are my major concerns. Quickly, I want to run through a few minor concerns. The max camera zoom, I just feel
Yeah,
like
but then when
it's
you
a
do get to
little
play,
close. This has been a common complaint.
you're
I'm not
gonna
asking
know
it to
enough
be back,
that you're gonna
50%
rip
or
through the
100%
campaign.
more. I think even just 10 to 20% more pushed back. There's actually a lot of times while you're playing the game where the camera
That's
will
funny, Anthony.
pull back just a little bit. And
It
once
happens.
it does those at those particular instances, I get this sense of relief, like, oh, this is where I want it. This is where I like the camera. But then shortly after you leave, whatever that point of interest is, the camera goes back to what I feel is a relatively tight and really kind of feeling a little claustrophobic at times. So just a little bit more back, I think, would be really good. The skill tree, I had this complaint in the beta, and it's still the case here. I feel
Yeah,
like
it's
just
expensive.
a little clunky to navigate,
And I had
especially
to drop like
respecking
80
where you
or
have to pull
something
points out of the end
just
of
to
the
be able to
tree
play
in
it
order
early,
to
because the
change things
$70
in the
pre-order
earlier
doesn't
parts
even
of
let
the
you
tree,
play
because
early.
otherwise it's not going to let you remove points because it'll break the chain. I think there's a better way they can handle this, kind of like a work in progress mode.
I just
where
already
you can
didn't play
confirm
any
your
of the
build and
betas.
not have to constantly move points from the end all the way to
So
the
I was
beginning
like,
and then
man,
back to the end again.
I'm gonna
The
be behind
low-level
people
class
already.
balances
I
has
might
been
as
talked
well
about a
just
lot, but
fork
it's
out
a
the
little
extra
out of
money
whack,
and
specifically for
get
the
early
Barbarian
access so
Druid.
I have more
know they
time
get
to
really
catch
strong
up
at
to what
endgame,
people
but make
already
them
know.
feel a little less like last place as you're playing and leveling up, because they just feel like a bit of a slog in those early levels. And the
Probably watch some
overlay map,
videos
I've
today,
kind of
get
turned
some
the
like
corner on
basic
this. At
tips,
first I was
even
like,
though
whatever, these people are just
I've
complaining. But I don't
played
know,
a
if people want to
shit
play
ton
with
of
the map
Diablo,
laid
so
over
I'm
the
not too
screen,
worried.
let's just let them, I guess. You know what I mean? Especially it's going to be mostly for the hardcore grinders, and so it's really not going to negatively impact the experience of your core casual base, which is a bulk of the people who are going to pick up and play
That
Diablo
sucks,
4.
man.
Now that we've run through that, though, I really want to emphasize here that the good news is, even with all these critiques and criticisms, none of this stuff kills the game for me. The overall package, what Diablo 4 delivers, I really enjoy. I've really liked the
Yeah,
game, and
still
I'm really
sucks,
looking
though.
forward to playing it. These are just areas of improvement, I guess I would say, and some pain points that I think could be improved upon, things that could be better. And I just want to quickly wrap up by saying, here's some things that I'd like to see added within seasons or expansions or whenever. I'd love to see some larger scale encounters, so on the PvE side of things.
My
I would
grandpa
love
passed
raids.
last
I know
year.
a lot of
He
people
gave me-
are
he was
against
a huge
this,
Yankees fan like
especially
me.
a lot of the core Diablo community. So if they never come to the game, I totally understand. But I think
And
there's
he
a way
gave me
you can
this
implement
stuff,
kind of
and I
group
keep some of it on
activities,
my
and it
desk.
doesn't
Check
need to be
this
like
out.
10 or 15 person
Piece of
raids,
grass from
but
the
like
original
really
Yankee
challenging
Stadium.
group content, even if it's just for like 3 to 4
I'm
people,
assuming it
where
was
it
green
requires
when
a
he
lot
got
of
it,
coordination.
and not
It
dead,
doesn't have to
but-
give the best rewards in the game.
Keep a
Just
lot of
make
cool
it so
stuff
that
around
it
here
has
that
an
he gave me.
equal percent chance to drop high level stuff as any other end game activity does. That would be a great alternative, rather than just making like, oh, you only get the best gear, or you only get the specific set from the raid activity or from that really challenging 4-man group activity. No. Just make it equivalent and maybe reward special cosmetics, if nothing else, right? Unless you're just trying to sell those in the cash shop, in which case I understand Blizzard. But also talking about larger scale encounters, PvP, I would absolutely love some like big team-based objective things like capture the flag or zone controls or tower fights. Imagine some open world environments where you'd go in and there'd be like different factions, and depending on the faction that you were playing as, you would be battling the other faction. Call it light and dark. It's almost like another Diablo game did this already. And then you could just battle over control of towers, and then whoever one gets, it's like a tug of war, pushing back and forth. There's so many cool things you could do with big scale PvP that I think would be great in Diablo 4. Speaking of which, I would love to see some more PvP modes, you know, things like arenas, solo arenas, or 2v2 or 3v3. I think it'd even be a great idea. Listen, we got normal and hardcore. What if there was
Yeah,
just
I'm just rooming for a
PvP?
couple
The whole
hours,
game was
Kim.
PvP, right? You can
Probably-
play normal,
actually, probably another
where
hour and a
there's just
half.
PvP and
I gotta
Fields
go
of
to the
Hatred.
grocery
You can
store,
play
make some
hardcore,
food.
where
I'm
if you
gonna
die
hang
in
out, and then I'll
PvE,
do
or
like
if
a
you die in
longer
the Fields of
stream.
Hatred, you're dead forever. What about PvP mode? where PvP open world is everywhere.
Oh, Nix, you're the Boston
That'd be
fan.
pretty cool, I think. And then harder tier
I forgot
difficulties,
who
like
it
I
was that
mentioned, to
said
give us
that
a tier
before.
5. I'm sure that's coming at some point. I almost guarantee. And then lastly, just give us more cool legendaries. As it is, there's some pretty cool build modifying things, especially with the uniques. Just keep expanding that. Keep adding more things that change abilities a lot, make it crazy. That is my hope. But there you go. That's going to do it. Those are my biggest critiques, concerns for Diablo 4. Ultimately, the game's great. I cannot wait to play it. We are like a day away. I'm going to be blasting. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope to see you guys there. These are things that could be better, in my opinion, and I hope at least some of these get addressed as time moves on. But that does it for me today. Thank you, as always, for watching. Hope you enjoyed the vid, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy.
There was one I wanted to watch.
Hey folks,
Watch
this
the
is
Riker
Riker,
one.
and today we're going to go over the ABCs of Diablo 4. Between Fortify, Lucky Hit, Overpower, Diablo 4 has a lot of different game terms. And while many of them do have tooltips explaining what they are, what they do, those tooltips aren't always there when you need them, and even then you're sometimes left with questions, or they're lacking important context. In this video,
Hey,
we're going
Solution,
to
what's
go
going
over
on, man?
60 different game terms, what they mean, and give any extra info that can help you out in understanding how you can use this
Yeah, I feel
game
you,
mechanic
Nix.
to your advantage. I want this to be your comprehensive glossary for Diablo 4 game mechanics. So I'm going to timestamp every single term down in the description, and this will all be sorted alphabetically. So if you want to just skip ahead, you can easily find where, well, where's Fortify? I can see where F is. And just a note here, Diablo 4 is a new game. We don't yet know everything about it, so if any clarifications or additions or corrections need to be made, I'll do that in the description, and if necessary, put out another video. Oh, and I'll just have some beta footage rolling in the background, so you have something to look at other than my face. So, without further ado, let's start with a big one. All damage reduction, aka damage reduction from all sources, aka damage reduction. As you might guess, this reduces damage from all sources, and it applies after your damage reduction from armor and resistances. As this stat increases, additional bonuses become less effective. Damage reduction does not stack additively, but rather multiplicatively. This means that if you have one source that gives you 50% damage reduction, and then another source also gives you 50% damage reduction, you can't just add those two percentages together to get 100%. Doesn't work that way. Although, you know, it would be nice. No, instead what happens is that each source of damage reduction reduces your damage one at a time. So the first source reduces your damage taken by 50%, then the next reduces the remaining damage by 50%. In this example, the math works out for that to be 75% damage reduction rather than 100. Then if you have a third source of damage reduction, that would again apply to the remaining damage you're taking. So that 25% left that you're taking half of that. So that works out to another 12.5% damage reduction, and your total then would be 87.5% damage reduction. And this continues on with each additional source, meaning you will never reach 100% damage reduction. So as you can see, each additional source is increasingly less effective. Think of it like this. You swim halfway across a pool. Then you swim halfway across the remaining half. Then you swim halfway across the remaining half, and so on and so on. You're never going to actually reach the other end of the pool. You're just getting close, but every time you're swimming a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and tinier distance. So damage reduction is definitely important, but if you already have a bunch of damage reduction, it might not be so important to get another source. At least if your option is getting something else more beneficial to you instead. And the last note we'll make about damage reduction here is that barbarians just natively have 10% all damage reduction. All right, that was a big one.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for stopping in.
Oh my. That takes us to armor. Your total armor rating is the sum of the armor from your chest, your helm.
I'm mostly just doing a quick little stream here for like another hour and a half,
contribute to your armor,
and then I'll stream tonight around about 7:30 Eastern.
Applies a flat damage reduction to physical damage that you take, including physical damage over time that is a bleed. It also partially reduces the amount of non-physical damage that you take. Specifically, 50% of the damage reduction from your armor contributes to your damage reduction from non-physical sources. However, in higher difficulties, higher world tiers, your armor contributes less and less to non-physical sources. This is to simulate how, like in Diablo 2, as you go up in difficulty, you are getting resistance penalties. So at World Tier 3, you only get a 30% contribution from your armor, and at World Tier 4, only a 10%, making you very reliant on getting resistances on gear pieces and in other ways.
Hey,
Now,
James.
there is a cap
Not really
on how
looking
much
for
damage
anything.
reduction
I'm,
you can get from armor, and
just
that's
invitation
85%.
farming.
However, the devs expect that you're going to spend most of the game
Just a
at
quick
about
little easy
25%
thing.
damage
I don't have to really
reduction
think
from
about.
armor. And eventually, over time, you'll build up to about 40%
assuming
damage
it
reduction
popped.
from armor on average, unless you're going for a super tanky build. Now, as you go higher up in level, every individual point of armor contributes less and less to your total damage reduction. However, higher level
I know,
gear
crazy,
has more
right,
armor
Nix?
on it, so you don't have to worry about this too much. As you level up and as you're just normally playing the game and getting better gear, you will see your total damage reduction from armor increase over time. But what this means is that if you, for instance, or for whatever reason, don't change your gear for 20 levels, then you're going to see your damage reduction from armor actually going down as you continue to level up. Now, there's one last factor that's going to affect how much damage reduction you get from armor, and that's your enemy's level. In short, the higher level your enemy is relative to yourself, the less effective your armor is. The lower level they are in relation to you, the more effective your armor is. All right, next up we have attack power. Attack power is not a real number. It's not how much damage you deal. Unlike some other games, there's no game mechanic attached to attack power. It's just the game giving you a rough estimate of how powerful you are from a damage perspective. So if the number goes up, you are probably dealing more damage. But there's a lot of nuance to that. Attack power factors in the attacks per second of your weapon or weapons, plus your offensive stats that apply to all attacks. So things like crit chance and crit damage are factored in, since those can always apply in all situations, but your damage versus vulnerable targets will not apply because the game can't factor in how often targets are going to be vulnerable. Long story short, overall, don't fuss too much about attack power. Onto attack speed. Your attack speed is based on your weapon's
I
attack
could save
per
the
second,
cathedrals
plus any
and
attack
the
speed
Crimson
bonuses you may
Temples,
have.
but
If you are dual wielding, then the game
who knows,
uses
maybe I'll
the
find one.
average of your two weapons attacks per second. There will never be more than two weapons factored into your attack speed.
Maybe I'll
if
find
you
a
are
good
rogue, then you're either attacking
apothecary.
with your
and
your
the
ranged
5 seconds
weapon
I spend in the
or
map.
your two melee weapons. You're
Gotta get
never
up, Donnie.
attacking with all three at once. So if it's a ranged attack, it's just using the attacks per second of your ranged weapon. If it's a melee, it's the average of your two melees. Similarly for Barbarian, you're either attacking with one of your two-handers, in which case it uses the relevant attacks per second of whatever weapon you're using, or you're attacking with your two one-handers, in which case it uses the average of those two. So about attack speed bonuses. Let's say your weapon deals one attack per second, to make it simple, and you have a 30% attack speed bonus, then you will now be attacking with a speed of 1.3 attacks per second. Attack speed bonuses are additive. So if you have two sources of 10% faster attack speed, those add together to form a 20% attack speed bonus. So you'd go from 1 attack per second to 1.2. All right, onto the B's. Barrier. Barriers refer to a temporary defensive layer that you get that will soak damage until it's gone before you start taking damage to your life. Different classes have different means of generating barriers, with some classes being very well specialized towards generating barriers. You can make entire builds that revolve around barrier. And you'll see barrier represented by a blue glowing shield over your health globe. Similarly, barriers on enemies are represented by a blue energy glow around their health bar. Alright, basic skills. Whatever your class, your first skill points will be spent on basic skills. These skills will become your default attack, and you'll usually only pick one of them. They don't cost resource, they don't have cooldowns, and depending on your class, they may actually generate resource for you. Onto Berserk or Berserking. Berserking is a temporary condition that I believe only barbarians can get. Who knows if there's some unique that gives it to other characters, but at a baseline, it's a barbarian thing. If you're under the effects of Berserk, you deal 25% additional damage, and your move speed is increased by 15%. And this buff lasts up to 5 seconds. Many different barbarian skills grant berserking, and you can make entire builds based on berserk. On to bleed or bleeding. A bleed effect is a physical damage over time effect. That's simple. So anything that reduces physical damage will work against bleed. On to blood orbs. A blood orb is a necromancer mechanic. Necromancers have a variety of ways to spawn blood orbs, and these are equivalent to health globes from Diablo 3. You'll see a blood orb spawn as this crimson orb on the battlefield. If you step over it, it'll be consumed and you will instantly heal for 15% of your max life. Necromancers have different ways to build around blood orbs. Ways to get different bonuses when they pick up a blood orb, or ways to buff the effectiveness of blood orbs. On to bludgeoning. If you're a barbarian, you're going to see a damage type listed on your weapon, either bludgeoning or slashing. Bludgeoning damage is the damage type dealt by mace-type weapons. Now, damage type is important to barbarians because some skills require weapons or weapon types that deal specific damage, and passive skills may buff different damage types. Now, it seems that slashing weapons are more numerous than bludgeoning weapons. However, barbarians must still fill one of their 4 arsenal slots with a 2-handed bludgeoning weapon. Onto burning. Burning is just fire damage over time. Bonuses to burning do not buff fire damage, but bonuses to fire damage do buff burning. Some fire skills might apply an initial fire damage and then a burn, so bonuses to burning would just affect the dot, the damage over time. Next we have channeled. Now, for most skills, you click the button, the skill activates, you're done. If you hold down the button, the skill will activate over and over and over, but each is a distinct and discrete cast of that skill. It'd be no different from you spamming that button as quickly as you can. Channeled skills are skills that you want to hold the button down. These skills will consume an amount of resource per second as long as you're holding down the button, and there's generally some advantage to holding down that button as opposed to spamming it. Chill or chilled. This is a condition that reduces an enemy's move speed. Repeatedly chilling an enemy will freeze it. More on freeze later. Chill effects are generally applied by cold damage. Next we have close, and this is a confusing one. Sometimes the game refers to enemies that are close or enemies that are distant. For example, you might have a skill that knocks back close enemies. This mechanic isn't super clear, but it appears these are binary states. Enemies are either close or they are distant. Now, some people reported that close range is melee, but with some testing, it seems that that range, if it is melee, it's actually farther than most people expect. If you go to the city of Kyovashad and stand
no,
on
I
the
do not
waypoint,
usually
it seems
scour
the
them.
outer waypoint
I don't know why I did
circle
that. That was kind of
is
pointless, but
roughly the close.
I usually don't
distance.
even unidentify
Anything
them if I
within
get a
that circle would
reflect
be close to you. Next, we
elemental
have
damage.
control
I
impaired.
know immediately because I
When
die and
you
I
are
go
crowd
down to the next one.
controlled, you are considered control
And yeah,
impaired.
next I
So
could,
that
but
means when
I'm
you're
getting
under the
8.
effects
You
of
get
either a
8C
slow,
per map doing
mobilize,
this,
stun,
and what,
knockback,
like 10,
knockdown,
15
taunt, fear,
seconds?
tether, daze, chill, or freeze. The affix control impaired duration reduction will reduce the amount of time you spend in these crowd control
Unless it wants to be
states.
annoying.
Excluding knockback, which is an instantaneous effect. Cooldown. Quite simply, some skills have a cooldown, let's say 10 seconds, you have to wait 10 seconds before you can use it again, and cooldown reduction will reduce that amount of time. Cooldown reduction stacks multiplicatively. Just like damage reduction,
My current build
you
is
cannot
very
get
expensive.
100%. So every additional source of cooldown reduction becomes increasingly less effective. Core skill. Now, whatever your class, the second branch of skills that you unlock on your skill tree, these are your core skills. These skills consume resource to deliver more damage than basic skills. Most builds will use one basic skill and one core skill. When you have the resource, you cast the core skill. When you don't, you cast the basic skill. There's of course a lot more nuance than that. And I hope to see builds emerge as well that shake up this formula of one core and one basic. Core stats. The core stats are strength, intelligence, willpower, and dexterity.
pop?
Depending on your class
Wasn't
and your
paying
build,
attention.
some of these
Now
stats
it
may be
did.
more important to you than others. But every class generally has one main stat that they care most about, because it's the stat that serves as a multiplier for all their damage. Strength is for the
Damn it.
barbarian, willpower is for the druid, intelligence is for the sorcerer and the necromancer, and dexterity is for the rogue. Next we have crackling energy. This is a sorcerer mechanic. Some lightning spells can make crackling energy spawn, little globes of lightning. If you walk over a crackling energy, you collect it, and you get a stack of crackling energy, and you can have a maximum of 12 stacks. These will be denoted by little circles above your skill bar. As long as you have at least one stack of crackling energy, you'll automatically zap any nearby enemies for a small amount of damage. And every time this happens, it'll consume one of your stacks. There are a lot of interactions with crackling energy. It could be a very important mechanic for a lightning build, and generally not for the damage itself, but for interactions with other skills. Like you can have a build that makes you regain mana whenever you pick up crackling energy. Next, we got critical strike chance. This is a chance to deal bonus damage. When you see a yellow damage number, that's a crit. And that bonus damage is determined by your critical strike damage. Damage over time, however, cannot crit. So if you're a damage over time based build, then you probably don't care about crit chance. Now, everyone has a base amount of crit chance that is equal to 5%, and this can be further increased. Crit chance is an additive bonus. So 2 sources that grant you 5% increased crit chance will add up to 10%. Add that to your base 5 and you're up to 15%. It is possible to reach 100% crit chance. There are no diminishing returns here. Onto critical strike damage. The base extra damage of a crit is 50% additional damage. Within itself, crit damage is additive. So different sources of crit damage will all add up together. So if you have 2 sources that each give 10%, you get 10 plus your base 50, and therefore 70% crit damage. But that total crit damage is multiplicative with other damage sources. This is a good thing. This means that crits are always a significant source of extra damage. And we're going to talk more about mixing different damage types when we get to D for damage. Onto crowd control, or CC for short. When it applies to you, it's control impaired. When it applies to enemies, it's crowd control. So again, slow, immobilize, stun, knockback, knockdown, taunt, fear, tether, daze, chill, or freeze are all crowd control effects. So sometimes you have damage or skills or some mechanic that revolves around enemies being under the effects of crowd control or crowd controlled enemies. Any of those effects count. However, you cannot apply crowd control effects to bosses. Instead, when you would try to, you fill their stagger meter, and we'll talk more about stagger once we reach S. Then crowd control duration bonus. This increases the duration of your crowd control effects, excluding knockback, which is an instantaneous effect. Alright, damage, which seems like it should be straightforward enough, but specifically we'll talk about damage buckets. This is a key concept that the community has discovered. So damage bonuses come from different sources.
Hey Al,
These
what's going on, bro?
sources get grouped into 7 different buckets. You'll note that so far in this video we've spoken about additive and multiplicative quite a bit. And in this case, every damage bucket is a multiplicative bonus with every other damage bucket. Meaning, if bucket 1 gives me double damage and bucket 2 also gives me double damage, then those multiply together to quadruple damage, 4 times damage. If I then add in a third bucket that also gives double damage, that's doubling the 4 to make 8 times more damage. Big. But within a specific bucket, all damage sources
Nice.
are additive with each other. So in a bucket, if 2 sources give you
Bro, I have like
double
daily
damage,
missions.
that is plus 100% damage, you add up the plus 100 and the plus 100 to get plus 200%, meaning it's triple damage, not quadruple. If you then add in a third source within the bucket of another plus 100% damage, then it's 100 plus 100 plus 100, that's plus 300, or quadruple damage, rather than 8 times damage. And the more individual sources within the bucket, the greater the diminishing returns. So every added source of extra damage contributes less and less and less. What this means is that adding more buckets is generally more beneficial than adding more sources within a bucket. We can do a whole video on damage buckets, but for now, this is the simple version. Anything that says damage from is put into one bucket. For example, damage from Golem. Anything that says damage with is another bucket, like damage with core skills. Anything that says damage while is another bucket, like damage while healthy. Anything that says damage versus is another bucket, like damage versus stunned. Then your class's core main stat is its own bucket, crit damage is its own bucket, and vulnerable damage is its own bucket. So basically, all you really need to take away from this is that you want to be getting damage bonuses from as many different buckets as possible. It's generally more beneficial to diversify your portfolio of buckets before you continue to invest into multiple sources within a single bucket. Alright, next we have damage over time. or dot for short. Instead of dealing damage in a single instance, a dot spreads out damage over a period of seconds. The game will generally give you the total damage output and the total time. It's not going to tell you the damage per second. Effects that buff the base damage type of the dot will buff the dot, but not vice versa. Most dots seem to stack, with each dot basically just dealing its own damage and being treated as its own thing. So hitting an enemy with a dot twice, it's not going to prolong the timer, it's not going to overwrite each other, it's just going to be two different stacks of the dot, and each will expire on its own. There's some weird exceptions where sometimes recasting the same dot on an enemy will instead refresh the dot duration. Basically, it just overrides the previous cast of the dot, but this seems to be the exception rather than the rule. In general, it seems fair to assume at a baseline that dots stack, but always read the skill description just to see if you can glean any extra context. Alright, Dazed. This is a crowd control condition that makes enemies unable to attack or use skills, but still able to move. Dexterity. Dex contributes to your dodge chance. More dex, the higher your dodge chance. For Rogue, dex gives you more damage. And for Barbarian and Sorcerer, dex gives you more crit chance. Distant. We explained this when we spoke about close. Basically, if you're not close, you are distant. Dodge chance. Dodge chance is a chance to avoid taking damage altogether. As you build up dodge chance, every subsequent bonus becomes less and less effective. You cannot achieve 100% dodge chance. This is the same like resistance. If you're hit with a damage over time effect, you cannot dodge individual damage ticks, but you might be able to dodge the initial hit that applied the dot. If you're standing in a damage pool, though, just don't stand in it. That's how you dodge it. Dual-wielded weapon damage. While you're dual-wielding, both the attack speed and the damage of your two weapons is averaged out. It's not going to alternate one or the other.
Oh, dope, Andrew.
Pick one, it just averages them. You do retain all affixes, however,
Yeah, it
on
looks
all your
pretty
items
dope.
at any time. Affixes are not averaged or used
All the videos I
situationally.
see.
If you have +1 to a skill on any of your weapons, whether you're using that weapon or not, it's always contributing to you. Fear. This is a crowd control effect that makes the target run away for a short duration.
Pretty much any
While
bow
under the
build
effects of fear, targets
gets
cannot
out of hand
attack,
real quick
and they're
with
just going to
price.
try to run away from you. Fortify. Okay. This is a mechanic unique to Diablo 4. Oh, fortify. Okay. If you are fortified, you take 10% less damage. How do you become fortified? Well, you become fortified when your fortified
Hey, Frizz, what's
value
going
is
on?
equal to or greater than your current life. How do you get fortified? Well, certain skills or items can grant fortified.
Oh, nice,
But you can
Andrew.
never have more fortified than your total life.
Oh, wait,
so
what
you
am
can
I
sort
doing?
of
I
think
have
of
to finish
fortify
this one.
as a second
Are
life.
you gonna just
But
level
when
it
you take
normally, or are you gonna
damage,
do a 5-way
lose an
carry?
Equal amount of life and fortify. Now, your fortify is represented by a thin red glow around the inside of your health globe. Not to be confused with the healthy indicator, that is a thin red line on the outside of the health globe. So outside and not glowing, that is healthy
Normal.
indicator. Inside glow, that is
You're a
fortify.
better man than me.
Different skills or items can increase
That is
the damage
true.
reduction
I've
you get
done
from
it so many
fortify,
times
and some
that
classes are
I'm not
better
gonna
able to
learn
build
much
around
by
fortify, like druids and barbarians. Fortify's
leveling
damage
the normal
reduction
way
also
after the
applies
campaign.
against barriers. So if you are fortified and have a barrier, your barrier will take 10%
I mean, it does help
less
you learn your
damage.
build more,
Fortify
that's for
also
sure, but
synergizes with a mechanic called Overpower.
I can usually
Basically,
figure it out
more
pretty
fortify
quickly
means
now
more
since I played the
overpower
game
damage,
enough.
but we'll talk about Overpower later. By itself, Fortify isn't amazing. It's just an occasional 10% damage reduction. But if you can build around fortified buffs and also maintain a fortified state by ensuring you are generating fortify faster than you're healing, then fortify can be really good.
Mana stacking
Alright, onto
stuff, huh?
frozen or freeze. This is a crowd control
think I've
state.
tried anything
The
with
target
mana
is
stacking
frozen
before.
solid, unable to move or do anything. And if they're killed while in this state, they shatter to pieces, meaning they can be resurrected by other monsters. Something that is frozen is also considered chilled, for purposes of buffs against chilled monsters. Basically, consider frozen to be
Oh, dope.
100% chilled. Chilled is something that you can apply repeatedly to enemies. So an enemy that is under a chill effect is some percentage chilled.
Find
If you
Legion?
keep
Nice.
chilling them, that percentage
Yeah, that's a
increases,
perfect build
increases,
for
increases,
Legion.
and once it reaches 100% chilled, then they are frozen. You're filling an invisible chill meter. Healthy. If you are currently at over 80% of your max life, you are considered in the healthy state. You'll know if you're in the healthy state or not because you'll have a thin red line around your health globe.
Yeah,
when you
Legion's pretty
are
fun.
healthy.
I don't mind
Some
Legion.
skills, for instance, let you deal more damage against healthy enemies, and there's no easy way to tell when an enemy is healthy, so just estimate whenever their health bar is at least 4/5 full. Immobilize. This is another crowd control effect. An immobilized target cannot move, but it can still attack or use abilities.
Oh yeah,
Immune.
for his
This is a state
Andrew
of
in the
immune.
YouTube
If you are
chat, just
immune,
talking
you
about
cannot
he
be
made a
damaged or
mana
crowd
forge build.
controlled, and if you are currently crowd controlled,
And he's
your
really
CC
liking it.
is removed. Injured. This is a state that you or an enemy can
Hey,
be.
thanks, man.
Injured characters have less than 35% of their max life.
It's overkill
You may be
damage,
able
but
to
it's
make a
fun.
build that revolves around dealing more damage to injured enemies. And again, there's no easy indicator for that, so just roughly, you see that their health bar is down to a third or less, then they're injured. Intelligence. This stat gives you 0.5% resistance.
I could
to
up
all
it another,
elements
like,
per point. For sorcerer, you
23
get more
million
damage per point,
right now if I
and
wanted
for rogue,
to.
you get more crit chance per point. Key passive.
But
Key
it cost
passives
me
are the
about
final
60
nodes
divine.
on your skill tree. Every class has a few to choose from, and you can only select one. Key passives are very powerful and tend to be build defining. Knockback. Knockback is an instantaneous crowd control effect. It knocks someone away from the attacker in the direction that the attack came. Things that extend or reduce crowd control duration have no effect on knockback since it's instantaneous. Knockdown. This is knockback's evil brother. This is another crowd control condition, and it makes the target fall down and unable to move or act at all. You can build around knocking down enemies and dealing more damage to knocked down enemies. Level. I mean, that's obvious, but what does a level give you? Every level, your life increases, plus your core stats also increase. Every level until 50, you get a skill point. Then after that, every quarter level, you gain 1 Paragon point. So 4 Paragon per level after level 50. The max level in the game is level 100, meaning you'll gain 200 Paragon points just from leveling, and a few other Paragon points from other game systems. And again, the level difference between you and a monster will apply damage reduction. Alright, life. I mean, this is simple. This is how many hit points you have. You take damage, your life goes down, it reaches 0, you die. Your life naturally increases as you level up, plus items and skills can increase your life.
Is
Lucky
mana
hit chance
bond
and lucky
pretty-
hit effect.
pretty OG?
Alright, this is a big one that's going to cause a lot of confusion for a lot of people. For those who know what proc chance is, lucky hit chance is proc chance. That's it. Simple as that. If you don't know what proc chance is, then let's dive in. Every skill that hits an enemy has a base chance to trigger a lucky hit when you hit an enemy. A lucky hit does nothing by itself. It doesn't do extra damage, it doesn't crowd control an enemy. What it does is it gives you a chance to trigger a lucky hit effect. And you get lucky hit effects from either skills or items or some passives. So for instance, one lucky hit effect could be when you land a lucky hit, you reset the cooldown on one of your skills. So let's say you're using a skill that has a 50% lucky hit chance. Then that means that half the time you hit an enemy, you're going to reset the cooldown on your skill. In this example of having that as your lucky hit effect. Again, lucky hit does nothing by itself, we're just giving an example.
yeah.
Now here's where things become a little bit more tricky. Lucky hit effects generally have a chance to trigger of their own. So for instance, it might be a 10% chance. So for that same example, it could be on lucky hit, you have a 10% chance to reset the cooldown of your skill. So following that, let's say you're using a skill that has a 50% lucky hit chance, and your lucky hit effect is a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown. Then in practice, this means that whenever you hit an enemy, there's a 5% chance to trigger that lucky hit. 50% of the 10%.
Hey, Drew B, what's up, man?
Or 10% of the 50%, the math works out both ways. You're just taking the percentage of the percentage. If you have advanced tooltips enabled, which please do, you will see your lucky hit chance. In general, more single target skills will have a higher lucky hit chance than skills that hit multiple enemies at once. Then gear or passives can further modify your lucky hit chance. Extra sources of lucky hit chance add together. So 4 sources of 5% will add up to 20%
Oh, you're
extra
Droopy? Oh,
lucky
okay.
hit chance. But that 20% bonus is added to the final number. So remember how in our previous example
I knew
we said
both names
that
anyways.
we worked out to 5% of the time we are landing a lucky hit on enemies? This would mean you're getting 20% more of that final number, so the 5% becomes a 6%. It doesn't become a 25%. Lucky hits can be something you either do or don't care about, depending on how you build your character. Movement speed. The max movement speed bonus you can get in Diablo 4 is 200%. That's where you're capped. This includes bonuses from all sources. You cannot surpass double speed. Overpower. All right, this is going to be another big one, new to Diablo 4. Whenever you hit an enemy, there's a 3% chance for you to apply extra damage called overpower damage. So a little bit similar to crits. When you see light blue damage numbers, those are overpower hits. Dark orange damage numbers, those are crits that also overpowered. Now the base overpower damage is 50% extra damage. Then overpower also deals bonus damage that is the sum of your current life, not total life, plus any fortify you have. And you can further buff this overpower damage with different skills and items, and willpower inherently buffs overpower damage for all classes. However, damage over time, passive abilities, and channeled skills like Whirlwind cannot overpower. You cannot normally raise that 3% chance to overpower. What you can do is, with some skills, you can, under the right conditions, guarantee an overpower hit. Tanky builds that stack Fortify benefit the most from overpower, with the Druid in particular, and even the Barbarian having many tools in order to build around overpower damage. But here's the thing about overpower damage. As of right now, with the way its damage seems to scale, primarily based around your life and your Fortify and overpower damage bonus, it seems as though overpower damage is actually underpowered in the endgame. It seems like it just adds a flat damage bonus that won't get multiplied by other damage sources.
You probably did.
And the higher in level you go, the more inconsequential that
Considering he's
damage
talking
bonus
about
is
Diablo.
relative to all your other damage bonuses. In early game, this flat damage bonus can be incredibly strong. You can probably use a leveling build that benefits tremendously from overpower. However, I don't expect to see any of the top builds at level 100, the endgame ultimate builds, using overpower. It just doesn't seem like they'll contribute enough damage to make it worth building around overpower. Now, I'll note that I said it seems a lot. Again, the game isn't even out yet, and the overpower mechanic isn't fully understood. And maybe even for Season 1, they're going to rebalance it if it is underpowered. Again, if any of this info becomes obsolete or incorrect, I'll update this video description or I'll release a new video. Alright, physical damage. This includes bleeding damage, i.e. physical damage over time. Poisoning. Okay, there's poison damage and then there's poisoning damage. Poisoning damage is the dot. So something that buffs poisoning damage is only buffing the poison damage over time, not base poison damage. Potion capacity, very simply, this is how many potion charges you can store, and this can be increased with items or via zone progress through the Renown system. Renown, this is a gameplay system that we're gonna just very briefly summarize. It rewards you for completing different activities within a region. Renown is tracked separately for all 5 regions, and it can include very important rewards like skill points, potion charges, and paragon points, so don't ignore the Renown system. Resistance. Alright, there are a few different types of resistance: fire, cold, lightning, poison, and shadow. Those are your 5 elements. Resistance reduces the amount of damage.
So they don't call it chaos, they call it
sources,
shadow.
and it applies to both the dot and non-dot
Shadow
versions
damage.
of all of these effects. Your total damage reduction versus any of these elements is made up of 50%. Half of it comes from your armor, and the other half comes from your resistance. So if you have 20% fire resistance, that reduces the fire damage you take by 10%, with the other contribution coming
Just waiting
from
for him to
half of
say
your
shadow
armor
damage ignores
damage
barriers.
reduction. And as we covered when we
and
spoke
shields.
about armor, as you go up in difficulty, higher world tiers, your armor will contribute less to your damage reduction from elements, and therefore becomes increasingly important to stack resistance. However, as you stack resistance, additional sources become less effective, so you cannot achieve 100% damage reduction. This also means that it's going to be better to have one source of resist that gives a lot of resist than multiple sources that give tiny amounts. Slashing. As we explained with bludgeoning, slashing is the other weapon damage type that barbarians have access to. Again, some skills require slashing weapons, and barbarians must fill one of their 4 weapon slots with a 2-handed slashing weapon. Slow. This is another crowd control effect, and it reduces move speed for a short time. This isn't known for sure yet, but it does seem that slow and chill are 2 separate effects, in that chilled enemies are not also under the effects of slow. Both effects reduce movement speed, but technically a chilled enemy does not count as slowed, so if you deal extra damage to slowed enemies, I don't believe that's going to work against
Barkeep's
skilled
son.
enemies. This is not 100% sure, however, and if we get contradictory evidence, again, I'll update the description. Stagger. Okay. Some enemies you fight, big, important enemies
Milking
like world
maid.
bosses, will be immune to crowd control effects, and instead they're going to have a stagger bar. So whenever you hit an enemy with an effect that would otherwise crowd control a different enemy, instead of getting crowd control, you're going to add to their stagger bar. That stagger bar will continue to fill and fill and fill, and once it reaches its max, the enemy becomes staggered. When staggered, a boss is considered to be under all crowd control effects, and that's for the entire duration of the stagger, which seems to be about 12 seconds. Additionally, world bosses will have unique effects that apply once they are staggered, and that can alter the rest of the fight, generally in a way that's beneficial to the player. So, in the case of a Shava, for instance, the world boss, when you stagger her, you break off one of her
Creates milk
armpits,
potions.
thereby making the rest of the fight easier.
More effective at
Stealth.
healing.
This is a condition. It seems to mostly be useful for rogues, but again, who knows if some unique item will let it apply to other
But she has to pick up
classes.
glass orbs.
While you are under the effects of stealth, you cannot be directly targeted by enemies. If you use an attack or you take damage, you lose the stealth condition. Stealth also might have some duration. A number of rogue abilities revolve around entering stealth or benefiting from stealth. Strength. Every point of strength gives you 1 point of armor.
That'd be mad
For the
funny
barbarian, more strength gives
to
them more
make
damage,
like
and for
an
rogue, more
RPG,
strength
but all
gives
the
more
characters are
resource
like super
generation.
kind of lame.
Stun
Like
or stunned. This is another crowd control.
9 to
condition.
5
Stunned
office
enemy cannot
guy
attack,
stuck at
use
work hates his
skills,
life.
or move. Taunt. Taunt is a crowd control effect that forces the target.
You have to continually do
target
certain
the
things to
caster
keep his
for
suicide
some
meter
amount
from
of time.
filling.
Tether. Tether is a crowd control effect that will stop a creature from walking outside of a given radius. So you might see this applied to yourself when an enemy summons some kind of pillar with chains. The chain is attached to you and you can still move freely within the radius.
50-year-old mom going
specific
through a midlife
chain
crisis
radius
after
around that
menopause.
pillar, but you cannot move outside of it. Thorns. Thorns is damage that is dealt back to the attacker. So if you have thorns and someone hits you,
The
they take
Slormancer?
your
Is that a
thorns
game or a
damage.
character?
Thorns damage does
don't think I've
not
heard of that
apply to
before.
attacks that are entirely
Oh wait, I have to
damage
finish
over
this
time
one.
effects.
Damn
So
it.
if you're hit with a dot that deals an initial damage and then a dot, the initial damage will trigger the thorns, but the subsequent ticks of the dot will not. Thorns damage is buffed by your core main stat. You can stack Thorns bonuses as affixes on your gear. Iron Barb Elixirs will grant you bonus Thorns damage for 30 minutes, and different skills can use Thorns. Thorns builds may be a thing, particularly for Barbarian and maybe Necromancer. Ultimate. Now, whatever your class, you will eventually unlock the ability to spend skill points into ultimate skills, or specifically just one. Ultimate skills generally have very long cooldowns.
I'll be back in a
Roughly a
second.
minute, sometimes more, sometimes less, but they deal big damage or otherwise have very significant effects. You don't have to take an ultimate. If you do, you can only select one ultimate, but it's ultimately your choice whether you want to build around an ultimate or not. You have to sacrifice a slot on your skill bar for a very long cooldown. I think in the meta we're going to see some builds using ultimates and some that won't. Unstoppable. Unstoppable makes you immune to crowd control and will instantly break any crowd control that is active on you. In my experience, it's a really good idea to keep some unstoppable skill on your skill bar. You get hit with a hard CC like a freeze, man, does it feel good to be able to just instantly pop out of that. Now, elite monsters will become unstoppable after they've been hit with enough hard CCs. And this is just a balance thing to prevent them from being permanently crowd controlled. You'll know they're unstoppable because you're going to see above their head a little broken chain icon appear. Vulnerable. Alright, vulnerable is a condition that can be applied to enemies, or enemies can apply to you, that lasts for a short duration, and by default, enemies who are vulnerable, or anyone who is vulnerable, takes 20% increased damage. But with gear or paragon or skills, you can increase the amount of damage you deal versus vulnerable enemies. If you are vulnerable, you will see on your health globe this shattered glass texture. Definitely be wary while you're vulnerable. You might want to back out of combat for a bit, or pop a defensive skill or a potion. If an enemy is vulnerable, they'll have a purple glow around their health bar. Vulnerable is a super useful stat, especially in party player versus world bosses, because it benefits everyone. If that enemy is made vulnerable by just one person, everyone gets that 20% or more damage buff. Every class seems to be able to make a build that revolves around vulnerable, but rogues are especially good at it. And as we discussed with the damage buckets, vulnerable is its own damage multiplier. So if you deal 50% increased damage to vulnerable targets, that's always going to be 50%. It's not going to get clumped in with other damage bonuses and therefore actually be dealing less than 50% additional damage. So in practice, this means that no matter what your build is, it's almost always beneficial to work in some vulnerable damage. Unless you are literally never making enemies vulnerable and never playing with anyone else who is making enemies vulnerable. Weapon speed. We kind of already covered this, but basically your weapon speed refers to your weapon's attacks per second prior to any bonuses. When dual wielding, these numbers are averaged. And your weapon speed serves as the base calculation for your attack speed. And lastly, willpower. Willpower grants more healing received per point. It gives more overpower damage per point. And for Barb and Sorcerer, it gives more resource generation per point. And that is going to wrap up this video. Again, I'll try to keep things in the description updated with any new information and make future videos if necessary. If there are any additional tips related to any of this or any corrections or clarifications that you would like to add, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Or if you have any questions as well, feel free to drop them and I'll see if I can address them either as a response directly to your comment or in a future video. Because do stay tuned for more Diablo 4 guides. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more Diablo 4 content. Hey folks, this is Riker with my review of Diablo 4 after having had review access for a few days. That on top of the beta experience, on top of the experience playing at Blizzard HQ, the endgame build. Now, normally I don't make review videos, I make overview videos where I talk about a game, talk about its systems. I don't necessarily review and evaluate the merit of the game itself. But basically my entire channel has been an overview of Diablo 4, so the purpose of this video will be to help you decide whether you should buy Diablo 4 or not. Now, a little about me so that you understand the perspective that I'm coming from, since you should always consider a reviewer's perspective whenever possible to understand their biases, their preferences. Reviews should ultimately seek to be unbiased, but people can't help but have preferences. So I've been a Diablo fan since I was about 12 years old. A lot of my high school days were spent on bail runs in D2. D3 was one of my most anticipated games of all time, and I have thousands of hours in Diablo 3 and Diablo 2. I was working as a video game journalist when Diablo 3 released, and I think I gave it an 85 out of 100.
Thanks for the follow,
It was a lot of
Andrew.
good, but it wasn't as good as I'd hoped. Torchlight 2, another ARPG, released a couple months later, and I'm pretty sure I gave that one a 95 out of 100. Now, I believe that the expansion Reaper of Souls greatly improved Diablo 3, and today I believe Diablo 3 is a very fun game with some significant flaws that prevent me from enjoying it as much as
Oh, that sounds funny as hell.
I don't
I'll
like
have
the
to check
design of
that
the
out.
Paragon system. I don't think the base itemization is particularly interesting, and years of power creep have made progression way too fast, and drop rates are out of control. Now, after having played a bunch of different ARPGs over the past decade,
Thanks, man.
I believe what Diablo 3 does better than any other ARPG is the feel of combat. But I believe other ARPGs have more interesting itemization and character progression systems. So, that's me and my preferences. So let's talk about Diablo 4, the game that is supposed to be a return to glory for Diablo. Many Diablo fans rejected Diablo 3. D3 was absolutely a huge commercial success, one of the best-selling games of all time, made a ton of money, but in some ways it was a giant failure because it made Diablo lose its status as uncontested king of the ARPG genre, and it led to the rise of competitors that kept
It's almost the
closer
drink
to
from
Diablo 3
Futurama.
formula. Now, 11 years after the launch of Diablo 3, we have Diablo 4, whose
Hey,
whole
thanks for the
motto
gift
is
sub, man.
Return to Darkness, which is
Frizz got a
also
sub.
symbolic in intending to be a return to the roots of Diablo, whereas Diablo 3 sort of strayed from that. But in addition to honoring the past, Diablo 4 is also taking a huge step in a different direction by having an open shared world, similar to an MMORPG, just without a massive amount of players. But you can walk from one end of the world to the other, and you'll run into other players along the way. You'll see them in town, you'll join up with them against world bosses and random events. You exist in this persistent world. It's not just I create a game, I'm in this instance, I leave, I create a new one, and it refreshes. Now, over the years of open development that the devs have shared with us, a development process more open than I think we've ever seen anywhere at Blizzard, it's clear that the devs are trying to recapture some of the elements of Diablo 2 and even Diablo 1 that were lost with Diablo 3. Did they succeed in doing so? Did they manage to bring the best of all Diablo games together into some uber Diablo game? Or did they make some ungodly Frankenstein abomination? Well, let's evaluate. Now, to start, I'll say that this review won't cover the story. During my limited time with the game, I focused on gameplay and I skipped through all the story cutscenes and dialogue, but I will stream my full story playthrough because
Kind of open, but
very much
I have
care
a
about
feeling
story.
it'll just be like
Don't
every other
think that
game.
I
I'll
don't.
just play
and
as
I'll likely
sorcerers
make a
first.
separate story review video. Also, story spoilers are under embargo, so we're not even supposed to be
I was
talking
gonna
about
play
that.
Barbarian
What I will say
because
though, is that
I heard
Diablo
someone
is a universe that
say
is rich in lore. I mean, I got a 17
that
part
they
lore
get
series
stupid
about
strong
Diablo
in the
lore,
end game.
So,
So go dope.
one
I could
thing
play a
about Diablo
Whirlwind
4 is that it
Barbarian.
does a great job of building upon
And then
expanding
on the
that
next video I
lore
watched,
in meaningful ways.
it was the same person, and he was like, one thing they need to change though is the Barbarian and Druid feel like absolute crap to level in like through the campaign, and it takes a lot longer. And I was like, all right, well maybe scratch that.
In my opinion, the best in class ARPG combat. Diablo 4 basically takes Diablo
So probably
4's
either a
combat
sorceress
and
or a rogue.
improves upon it by adding a more tactical element to combat. We have the same fluidity of gameplay. Combat feels good and satisfying, and with some classes and builds, I'd go so far as to say it feels amazing. But additionally, now we also have an evade button, and enemies are designed in a way that encourages you to prioritize targets on the battlefield, move around a lot, not just stay stationary and hit it with my stick. There's more complex enemy mechanics to react to, and the game gives you tools to react to them, to dodge them. I'll note that I played on PC with a mouse and keyboard. I've heard good things about controller support, but I have no first-hand experience there. But anecdotally, one staunch
apparently it's
mouse
worth
and
it if you
keyboard
slog
member
through
of
it.
the dev team tried playing with a controller and hasn't looked back. So, combat feels great, but, well, maybe it's a but. The pace of combat is slower than other ARPGs. This is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your preferences. More tactical combat needs to have a slower pace. If what you are looking for is a mindless hack and slash where you just hold down a button and screens of monsters explode, this is not the game for you. At least not yet. Who knows in a year or two what the pace of the game will be. One thing I will mention as a con for the gameplay is I found myself opening my map a lot while traveling
is it?
the
Nice.
overworld. So basically, I walk a bit, or I'm on my horse a bit, then open map, close map, move more, open, look at map, move more, and just repeat, and it's just this constant interruption of my game flow to open up the map. Now, I know there's been a big push from old school ARPG fans for an overlay map in Diablo 4. This is basically a map that overlays on top of your gameplay, so you're looking at a map and the gameplay at the same time. That would solve this, but Diablo 3 didn't have an overlay map, and I don't remember this being an issue in Diablo 3. Yes, I would have to open up the map, but not nearly as often. So I'm wondering, is this a factor of the minimap in Diablo 4 being smaller, thus revealing less than in Diablo 3? Or could it be that the cameras may be more zoomed in, so we can't see ahead of us as far? I don't know what it is exactly, but I definitely would appreciate having to open my map less often. Now, on the topic of class balance and how every class feels to play.
Oh, here we go.
D4 launches
Class
with 5
balance.
classes: Barbarian, Rogue, Druid, Sorcerer, and Necromancer. More classes are expected to come, but not anytime soon. I generally prefer playing highly mobile, ranged classes, and at low level, the Rogue remains my favorite class to play. It just feels so good, so fun. During the open beta, Barbarian and Druid were my least favorite classes. They didn't
he's saying the
feel
exact
as
same
fun to
thing the
play,
other guy
partially
said.
based on them feeling weaker, but also just struggling with mobility issues and sometimes resource generation issues. So what I can say is the balance pass that was made since open beta has improved things quite a bit. I tried all 5 classes in review, at least at low level, and class balance for early play felt a lot better.
Oh, that's
Necromancers
good.
are no longer overpowered, but they're also not garbage. Sorcerers are no longer overpowered and still very strong. Barbarians felt a lot better. Druid is still my least favorite early game class. It feels weaker. unless you're running a pet build. Pets are super strong, but everything else just feels quite weak. That said, Druid becomes very strong at high level. As for high level endgame balance, look, it's going to be a process as the community discovers the most broken builds. By Season 1, which is expected
Druid
to be
pet build sounds dope.
mid to late July, I'm expecting
I'd be
a
down
balance
for that.
patch that's going to put things in a much better state. Not to say that they're in a bad state now, but evaluating the balance right now, I mean, again, it's going to change very quickly. This is going to be an evolving game with an evolving meta. But the early game is typically something that's not touched post-launch. And the early game experience right now is how new players will experience the game. This is going to be their first impression. And the balance there has gotten good, but it could have been a bit better. Every class can definitely beat the campaign, though. They can get through the content. That's not an issue at all. Now, the 5 classes they decided to launch with offer a good variety of play styles and flavor, and even within a class, you can feel like you can explore different class fantasies. You can be a fire sorcerer, a cold sorcerer, you can be a trap-laying rogue, or a sneaky backstabbing rogue. You can be a werewolf druid, or a stormcaster druid. Between skill trees, paragon, gear, there's a lot of room for theory crafting and creating a variety of different builds. Now, every game will have meta builds, but it feels like we'll be able to see greater diversity of builds and greater diversity within a given build than we currently see in Diablo 3. And respec cost is not prohibitive, so you're not forced to roll up a new character to change your build. At low level, you can change your build very easily, and at high level, the cost just basically dissuades you from constantly changing build. I'll have a full video giving an overview of the different classes going out tomorrow. Stay tuned for that. Now, with regards to game difficulty, I'll say that Diablo 4 is not an easy game. You start off with normal and veteran difficulty modes, and you unlock 2 additional difficulty tiers by completing specific challenging dungeons. The game isn't super difficult, it's not a Dark Souls here, but it's more challenging than Diablo 3. ARPG veterans will have no problem conquering Diablo 4, but newcomers to the genre or more casual players, they might find themselves hitting roadblocks along the way. They might need to level up, might need to gear up before progressing further, might need to look up build guides to see what are they doing wrong and how can they continue on. And to some degree, they might also just need to get good, because sometimes there's going to be fights that brute forcing your way through. I mean, I guess eventually you might be able to, but you're going to have to learn attack patterns. You're going to have to learn boss mechanics. And the way that Diablo 4 approaches extra difficulty is great. First off, bosses and enemies in general just have more mechanics than past Diablo games. You got to react to these mechanics, you got attack patterns to learn, and on higher difficulties, enemies don't just get more life and more damage, but they become smarter and more aggressive, which is a great way to dial up difficulty. It's more interesting. And you want to unlock those higher difficulties in order to gain access to better loot. But the game's gonna make you work for it. So speaking about the higher tiers, let's talk about some of the driving forces of an ARPG. Progression and loot. First, progression. The feeling of becoming more powerful, evolving your build, going from 0 to hero. Diablo 4 has enemy scaling. While playing the campaign, some zones have a minimum level, but once you reach that level, the zones scale up with you. You'll never be a level 50 character stomping around in a level 5 zone. And since the world scales up in level along with you, this can hurt your sense of progression. If the pace at which you are increasing in power via getting the right loot and spending skill points the right way, if this is not keeping up with how fast you're leveling up, you will actually feel weaker as you go higher in level. And you can never return to a low-level zone to feel like a tough guy stomping on weak monsters. Now, this was a trade-off made in the interest of having an open world in which all regions remain relevant in the endgame. If monsters don't scale up with you, then all low-level regions would be ignored at the endgame. And I do believe this trade-off was worth it, because it allows for so much more variety of content in the endgame.
That's the one thing that makes me nervous, is I hate games that scale with you, so you never really feel super strong.
Gear visuals don't really
At least not until the very, very end game.
Seeing the visual progression of gear as you play through an RPG, going from shoddy ragtag armor to increasingly
Elder Scrolls Oblivion did that crap, and I hated that game because of it.
Arguably over the top, as a lot of people might, say, that helps capture that feeling of progression. And D4 doesn't really have that. Gear instead is based on the regions. There's 5 regions, and each has its own distinct gear visual style, which is cool. And you can argue that legendaries and uniques look more awesome than regular items, and Early game, you're not decked out on them, and as you level up, you're getting more and more of these cooler looking items. But we don't have these tiers of visual progression like in Diablo 2 or Diablo 3 that, again, helps you feel that journey more. It's a minor thing, but it does impact sense of progression. Another thing that impacts sense of progression is the fact that you unlock your main damage dealer by like level 5, and that's the power you'll likely keep using as your main damage dealer all the way to level 100. It does become stronger with a greater skill point investment and supporting gear, but here's a level 100 Barbarian and here's a level 5 Barbarian, and they're both using Whirlwind as their main attack. The progression of skills in D4 is instead based around horizontal progression rather than vertical progression like in Diablo 2. In Diablo 2, you unlock more powerful skills that obsolete your earlier skills. This creates its own issues, which led to the synergy system, which again is not perfect. And I'm not suggesting that the D2 way of vertical progression was a better system, but you do feel the difference when you go from a level 1 skill to a level 12 skill to a level 30 skill. It feels like a significant upgrade. It feels more awesome. With Diablo 4's horizontal progression, you are instead expanding your toolkit. As you level up, you add more utility skills, and eventually possibly an ultimate. You're becoming a more well-rounded character. And this approach actually solves a lot of the issues with vertical progression systems, but it just doesn't feel as satisfying like changing out your main attack. However, what Diablo 4 does deliver is multiple vectors of progression. As you go through the game, you are progressing along a skill tree. You are then progressing along a paragon board. You're progressing your renown. You're progressing your codex of power. You're progressing through different tiers of itemization. You're progressing your gear upgrades. It always feels like there's a number of ways you can be advancing your overall power, which is great for keeping a player engaged and chasing after goals. But there is something a bit lost in the feeling of progression, just the experience. If I had to pick having one in my game over the other, if I could only have one of the two, I'd definitely go with having multiple vectors of progression like D4 has. That's what keeps me playing, but that sense of progression adds that extra magical quality to the experience. Alright, on to loot and itemization, arguably the most important part of an ARPG. At least for me. All other gameplay, everything else in an ARPG is just to serve the purpose of the slot machine of kill monster, get random reward with a chance of winning big. Diablo 4 has normal, magic, rare, legendary, and unique items. The loot hunt, overall, feels nice. It's exciting to get legendary and unique drops. Drop rates feel good. The game doesn't rain legendaries down upon you, so it remains exciting to get a legendary drop, but they're not so rare that you go multiple play sessions without finding one. As for the itemization, that is the items themselves, their properties, their affixes, what we see is something of a combination between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3 with some unique twists based on Diablo 4's unique mechanics. D4's itemization takes the best part of Diablo 3's itemization. Legendary aspects. These are properties that will modify the way a skill works to allow for build changing and build defining items. Just, it doesn't bring along the absurd damage multipliers. It does not, in my opinion, take enough of the best of Diablo 2's itemization, however. There's definitely a Diablo 2 influence, but I wish that influence were stronger than it is. For instance, item bases. In Diablo 4, there are inherent differences between weapon types. A sword has certain native properties that an axe does not. That's great. But I wish we also saw that with armor and other gear. There's just no distinction between light, medium, and heavy armor, for example. A helm is a helm is a helm. It doesn't matter whether it looks like a light crown or a full-on knight's helmet. It's just a piece of artwork, and a helm always has the same properties. The thing that Diablo 4 does very differently with its itemization comes in the form of situational damage multipliers. You have damage versus vulnerable enemies as an affix.
Of
damage
all
versus
the effing bosses to get.
Damage versus healthy enemies, etc.
I had to get the one that does chaos damage and has phases.
Here. Do check that out if you're planning to play the game. Now, on one hand, this opens up many build opportunities to create item and skill combinations that specialize in damaging enemies in specific ways. On the other hand, in general, affixes on gear just aren't as interesting or exciting as some other ARPGs. Outside of a legendary power, which that's always cool and exciting, I rarely look at an item and think, oh wow, what a great affix. Affixes generally contribute very small damage increases, like 5% more damage to vulnerable. Cool, that's helpful, but it's not exciting. You don't feel a 5% damage bonus. It doesn't appreciably change your gameplay experience. You know you're getting stronger. You can do the math, you can accept the numerical increase, but because it's not perceptible, you're not feeling that increase, it's just not exciting. In Diablo 2 at low level, you have a sword that deals an average of 5 damage per hit. Then you find a magic sword with an affix, plus 5 fire damage. Wow, that's doubling your damage. That's amazing. That is exciting, and it's a very appreciable increase. Diablo 4's itemization and damage scaling system is basically designed that, as I understand it, if you don't keep those numbers low, then damage would scale out of control. So we can't just say as a simple fix, well, increase that 5% to 50%, because then everything would spiral into trillions of damage. So again, it's a system that affords building characters via a variety of skill and item combinations that can benefit from and specialize towards different damage types and effects. You can have a vulnerable build, you can have an overpower build, you can have a fortify build. But the feeling of progression suffers in the meantime, and item affixes become generally less exciting. Basically, I feel like when it comes to progression in D4, with regards to skills and itemization and everything, the focus was on delivering a fantastic destination, a variety of final builds that allow for a multitude of playstyles and character customization, but the journey to that destination isn't as exciting as I would have hoped. Alright, let's talk a moment about the forced multiplayer in D4. D4 has no offline mode and no ability to stop yourself from ever seeing another player. While playing through the campaign, you'll only run into people you invite into your party. But outside of that, you will see other players in town hubs, and you will run into them sometimes out in the open world. Dungeons remain private instances to you and your party, and world bosses will always see a group of players, around 12. Now, I'm someone who is very concerned about MMO elements making their way into Diablo 4. There's a lot that I dislike about having random people in my game. I don't mind it so much in town, it can hurt my immersion, but it's not the end of the world. But in the open world, I hate it when, in MMOs, players are competing over resources, waiting for monsters or bosses or quests to respawn because other players got there first. And the worst is when you see this lineup of people waiting. I can safely say that I have no problems with how Diablo 4 handles all this. On the occasion when I do run into a random person in the world, it's generally at an event. Random events can spawn, and their contribution is almost always welcome. The random world events are generally easier with help, and sometimes you get the pleasant surprise of joining an event in progress, or an event that's nearly complete, so you just show up and boom, it ends and you get a nice reward chest. So running into other people outside of town has generally been a positive experience. The game has a trade system. You cannot trade legendary or unique items, but you can trade rare gear. I'm content with this. I do believe it is important to have a trade system. I think that's important for the health of a long-running online ARPG, but I don't want trade to be the most efficient way to gear up your character. Should there maybe be more things that you're allowed to trade in D4? Maybe there's room for adjustment here. It's hard to tell outside of experiencing that trade system in a living environment, but the core trade idea is solid. Some things can be traded, some things cannot be traded. Now, as for clans, the game has clans. It's about all we can say. It doesn't do much with them. Hopefully clan features can be built up in the future, maybe clan housing where you can work towards unlocking cosmetics for your clan, which, by the way, you can play solo, right? You can have a clan by yourself for solo players. But just imagine you have this house and you can mount trophies and whatever. That's just one example of a clan feature. Okay, let's hit upon all the other classic game review stuff now. Graphics and art direction. They nailed this. For those who didn't like the cartoony feel of D3, this is a firm return to grim and gritty. The game looks great. It's not going for 100% realism, but it's looking more like a realistic painting, which lends it a certain subtle style. The dark fantasy pervades every environment, every character, animations, environments, characters, monsters, everything looks great. Nothing stands out as subpar. Actually, you know what? There are some icons, like the Necromancer Book of the Dead icons, that do stand out as not being up to the same quality standard as the rest of the UI. It almost looks like a placeholder asset, but everything in-game is great, and with the ability to customize the visuals of our character, more than ever, we really get to appreciate the jump in graphics quality from D3 to D4. Environments are gorgeous, transitions between environments are seamless. The game even includes a vista mechanic where in specific designated regions you can make the camera angle come down to character level and kind of look forward over the shoulder onto the environment, and that's always a visual treat.
Oh my god, where the hell is this,
further
dude?
Enhances the mood. I remember this one particular instance of this lantern shaking in the wind, and the way the light and the shadows of the lantern are cast on the environment. It reminded me so much of that cinematic from Diablo 2 of the Wanderer emerging from that inn. Then sound design is similarly great. There's so much voice acting, which brings the world to life. Diablo 4 feels more alive than any other Diablo game, thanks in part to all the NPCs we get to meet and interact with. Probably more NPCs than all past Diablo games combined. All the sounds feel grounded within the world, and even the game mechanic sounds like drops manage to effectively signal without sounding out of place. And every region has its own iconic music. Skazglen feels so Viking. The Fractured Peaks has its mournful violin strings. Hawazar has this duduk, I think it's called. It's a horn instrument that is instantly recognizable. Then Kejistan has that sitar that gives that instant Arabian feeling. And the voice acting is fantastic, with standout performances from Lorath and Lilith and the Pale Man who freed Lilith. I don't remember if his name is public yet. From a technical standpoint, Diablo 4 runs great. No crashes, good frame rates, no bugs, all very polished. Again, I played on PC for what it's worth. Okay, now let's talk about replayability and content. I think it's going to take the average player about 20 hours to play through the main campaign. Longer if you do all the side content along the way, and there's a ton of side content. From side quests to dungeons to, again, random world events. And because of how the campaign is designed, and because of the world scaling, you can play through the game in a non-linear fashion. You're not forced to play through the different regions of the world in a specific order. And this greatly enhances replay value. On subsequent playthroughs, not only can you choose to play another of the 5 classes, but you can play through the quests in a different order and spend more or less time on the side content of different regions. Then you get the post-campaign content, the end-game content. Diablo 4 is launching with more content in it than Diablo 3 has today. It's launching with more content than any ARPG has ever full launched with. Yes, other ARPGs today do have more content in them today after years of getting more and more content over time, but Diablo 4's base launch content will also continue to get expanded upon every 3 months, with the first season already, again, stated to come by late July at the latest. So outside of that main campaign, you got open PvP zones, you got randomized world bounty quests, you got over 120 dungeons, open world events, a few world bosses, Helltide events, which are temporary hell invasions in a random part of the world, all while progressing through 3 key difficulty levels and defeating super dungeons to unlock those higher difficulties. There's enough variety of things to do to keep the average player busy for a while. I have a full video going over the endgame offerings right here. And then, on top of that, every new season should bring in some form of new content to add further replayability to the experience. So what we have is a solid foundation upon which content can continue to be built. There's potential for long-term engagement here. All right, now let's talk about value. For a base price of $70, you're getting a campaign that can take you 20 hours to go through, longer if you really explore all the side content. It's a full AAA narrative experience with cinematics, voice acting, cutscenes. Then there's the post-campaign content, and you can easily get a total of 80 hours of gameplay off of leveling 1 character. Multiply that by 5 different classes, and you got 400 hours of gameplay from just the base experience. Then factor in that the game will continue to get free seasonal updates every 3 months, and Diablo 4 can easily be a game that you can invest thousands of hours into over the course of years, assuming it remains fun for that long. All this for a base price of $70. Now, I don't know about you, but there are few forms of entertainment out there that deliver thousands of hours of entertainment for $70. ARPGs are generally very good value per dollar. Again, I got thousands of hours of fun off Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, and I'm expecting the same will apply to Diablo 4. Now, let's hypothesize that the first expansion releases in 2 years. You can easily have over 600 hours logged by then, if you played 80 hours every season. So that's 600 hours of fun before you're expected to spend money on an expansion to keep playing the game with the latest updates. Now, of course, I haven't touched upon the Digital Deluxe or the Ultimate Edition or the in-game shop or the Battle Pass. In my review build, there was no in-game shop, no Battle Pass. But as far as we've been led to believe, all this stuff will be purely cosmetic. So you can choose to not buy any of it and not have your gameplay experience impacted. Whether it's good value per dollar it's pretty much up to you. I can't tell you how much you should value an imaginary pair of pants. Once we see prices though, we can compare them to what else is on the market, but again, we don't have that info yet. Similarly, the Battle Pass should also be entirely cosmetic. We do, however, know how much the Battle Pass will cost. It's $10 for the basic pass and $25 for the accelerated pass that lets you skip tiers. And that sounds about par for the course for the industry. As for the Digital Deluxe, you get 4 days early access to the game, plus some cosmetics, plus a Battle Pass. So $90, that's $20 more than the base game, and for everything that's included, that does seem like good value if you value those extra perks and cosmetics. The Ultimate Edition also gives you a special fancy emote, plus the accelerated Battle Pass for $100. Again, this is good value because for only $10 more, you're getting something that's worth $15 more than the Digital Deluxe, plus an emote. However, again, this is if you value these things. If you plan to play the hell out of Season 1, then you don't really need the Accelerated Battle Pass, which in my opinion is more for people who believe they will not be able to put in the 80 hours required to complete a Battle Pass over the course of 3 months. So then, is the emote by itself worth an extra $10? For something that's not constantly visible on your character, that you need to activate to show off for a couple of seconds, I'd say no, that's not worth $10. But, as a diehard Diablo fan, I'd spend that money anyway because I wouldn't forgive myself knowing that there's something in-game that other people got that I didn't. But if this were any other game, I wouldn't bother with any of that and just get the base $70 game. So, just a high-level summary of pros and cons here. Pros. Graphics, sound, and art direction are fantastic. Gameplay is smooth and fun. Game isn't mindlessly easy. Strong campaign experience. Huge amount of side content. Robust initial endgame offerings. Tons of replay value. Multiple playstyles available for every class. Cons. Gameplay may be too slow for some modern ARPG fans. Itemization is not as interesting as some other ARPGs. Forced multiplayer is a turnoff for some people. Not all classes feel as good to play at low level. Sense of progression can be underwhelming. Alright, so to wrap things up here, if Diablo 4 is your first Diablo game, and it sounds like the kind of game that interests you, then I think you'll enjoy Diablo 4 a lot. I expect tons of people to really enjoy Diablo 4. It may end up becoming the most popular Diablo game yet, and the most popular ARPG ever. If you are an ARPG fan who hates Diablo 3 to this day, then you may feel that Diablo 4 is too much like Diablo 3 for your liking. If you are a fan of the super fast pace of modern ARPGs, then you may find Diablo 4 is too slow for you. Diablo 3 opened up the ARPG genre to a more casual audience, and in doing so, it lost depth of systems as a consequence. Diablo 4 is also opening up the ARPG genre to a wider audience, but this time, not to a more casual audience. Not by losing depth. It's opening up to the enormous audience of MMORPG players. Diablo 4's open world, its world bosses, its shared world experience, these are elements that will be very familiar to MMO players. Maybe they're even the reason that the MMO genre has always been so much bigger than the ARPG genre. But that said, the core gameplay of D4, the reward loop, the progression, the loot hunt, all of that remains fundamentally ARPG. And that's why, to me, no matter what MMO elements might be in D4, it is still an ARPG at its core. Diablo 4 has taken the Diablo franchise in a new direction. If all you want is more of the same, that's not what Diablo 4 is delivering. Diablo 4 is not an improved Diablo 2. It's not an improved Diablo 3. It does capture some of the best aspects of all Diablo games. It has Diablo 3's fantastic combat. It has a character progression system and skill point system more similar to Diablo 2. And it captures the gothic horror fantasy of Diablo 1. But on top of that, it's fundamentally changing the foundation upon which all of these systems exist by moving to this shared open world.
What's up, man?
And
I'm good.
that can feel alien to an ARPG purist. This isn't a dumbing down of Diablo. It's also not an attempt to perfect the existing Diablo formula. It's a new adventure. And if you're a Diablo fan, you're either along for this ride or you're not. But I can tell you that for the greater gaming audience, it's going to be one hell of a road trip.
Still farming.
But what are your thoughts on Diablo 4? Why are... Hey folks, this is Riker with my review of Diablo 4 after having had review access for a few days. That on top of the beta experience, on top of the experience playing at Blizzard HQ, the endgame build. Now, normally I don't make review videos, I make overview videos where I talk about a game, talk about its system.
In this video, we'll be helping you pick the best class for Diablo 4 with a unique twist that we've played all classes at endgame with multiple builds per class, so we can show you how they play and feel much later on. All classes are perfectly capable and powerful at endgame if you know how to build them. Some classes may have a slower start than others, but as you get your special skills and loot, you'll find they all grow really well. Many people are considering there is an established tier list already, but the reality is that your enjoyment will come from the playstyle you pick, so understanding your chosen class is an important decision. This is a summary of each class paired with an endgame performance to help you pick. Up first, we'll take a look at the Sorceress or Sorcerer. The Sorceress or Sorcerer are intelligence-based caster classes. They're perfect for players that enjoy controlling the battlefield and that like to deal elemental damage. Players that enjoy having plenty of effects on screen, such as freezing and then exploding something, or burning something, or electrocuting and stunning enemies, will love this class. Users that like to use stationary spells that deal damage over an area of effect while using another skill to focus on a single target will also enjoy it. The Sorceress relies heavily on a smart combination of skills and equipment, and usually requires to spend a couple of skills on survivability because of their low health. Players that enjoy glass cannon builds might enjoy this for this reason as well. The enchantment system allows players to enjoy the effective skills even while they're not directly using them, providing a lot of gameplay variety. This allows users to enjoy benefits of skills they might like, even while not playing with that specific skill. The main playstyles for the Sorcerer or Sorceress are Pyromancer, focusing on pyromancy skills for low health but high regen and burst DPS damage that pairs up with AoEs, and is a thrilling kind of gameplay with plenty of spectacle. Freeze and Control. Focus on controlling the battlefield by freezing and slowing enemies. Players that want to dominate the battlefield with control spells will be able to freeze everything on screen and deal massive damage to them. Lightning and Speed. The Sorcerer's Teleport has always been a coveted and unique mechanic of the class, and Diablo 4 makes Lightning Sorcerers masters of speed by giving special legendaries that benefit from movement speed bonuses. The Lightning Sorceress is a speed clear rusher's dream. And finally, Master of the Elements. Players that enjoy inflicting different types of status ailments and combining them together and using plenty of barriers will become essentially immortal. The pros of this class are battlefield control, skills that provide many options without requiring aspects, different types of elemental damage, high damage, and guided gameplay that's easy for new users to keep track of what they should do with their skills, like for example sticking to a single element. The cons are limited equipment space, limiting the amount of aspects you can use, low health depending on skills or barriers to stay alive, and some builds might get repetitive since you can control the field so well it's a bit like shooting fish in a barrel, and less resource generation mechanics than other classes, and higher elemental consumption often end in wait times in between pulls. We recommend the Pyromancer Sorceress for a great mix of damage and fanfare. Next we come to the Necromancer. Necromancers are the summoner class of Diablo 4, and they can play ranged or melee with intelligence being their main stat. Players that enjoy having summons and minions will be more inclined to play this class. Necromancers often stay on the back of the battlefield while providing support to their minions and using powerful skills to destroy or weaken their enemies. They have a unique corpse mechanic that is kind of mandatory to use, so players will often need to manage multiple resources at the same time, being essence, corpses, minions' health, etc., and they can also generate blood orbs, which act as an additional resource. Players that enjoy tactical gameplay will enjoy this playstyle, as minions will deal with the front lines, allowing the Necromancer to plan and control what's happening from a safe distance. Users that get overwhelmed with everything happening on the screen will not enjoy most builds that Necromancers use. The Necromancer also allows to play solo by sacrificing part of all of your minions, greatly boosting your own power. While it doesn't have many playstyles as other characters, each of them feels very unique. The Necromancer's unique mechanic is the Book of the Dead, which allows you to personalize each minion type to fit your current build. You can also sacrifice each type of minion for increased stats. For survivability, it mainly uses its minions to stay safe. While playing alone, it has a lot of ways to greatly increase its HP and even fortify itself, similar to the Barbarian. The main playstyles available to the Necromancer are solo overpower burst damage, This build sacrifices your minions for increased health and damage. You'll use the overpower mechanic to quickly annihilate all enemies while boosting your own stats to stay alive. Corpse Explosion. This build generates as many corpses as possible and explodes them to deal either static damage or damage over time. Players will need to control the battlefield and use minions to stay safe. Summoner. This build focuses around your minions and increasing their damage by debuffing enemies and inserting aspects that increase their power. And lastly, Mage DPS. This can either be a solo player or a hybrid between minions and spells using the minions as a shield. Use bone spells that focus around critical damage to quickly destroy elites and bosses. The pros of this class are that it's a very safe playstyle using minions while staying behind them. It has a variety of very distinct builds, and it's good early game and noob friendly since your minions will do the work for you while you learn. The cons are that it can get overwhelming to manage all resources and mechanics. You usually have long cooldowns. For high level play, it requires a good comprehension of build mechanics when using minions. It's highly dependent on equipment to make some builds work, and it has a limited amount of aspects due to equipment slots. Druids are nature mages that can summon companions, shapeshift, and command the elements to destroy their foes. Their main stat is willpower, which not only increases their skill damage, but also increases their overpower damage, synergizing very well with some of the skills that they use. Similar to the rogue, the druid is a jack-of-all-trades style of class that allows you to quickly shift back and forth between a melee or casting type of playstyle. Players who like to use melee skills while also casting powerful spells will find this class to be right up their alley. Druids in particular have exceptional AoE damage, but lack a little bit of single target damage that can make them difficult to play against facing one powerful enemy like a boss, particularly in the early goings of the game. They also have a typically slow start compared to many of the other classes, and learning to manage Spirit, which is the resource of the Druid, can be exceptionally difficult to do for new players until they get the hang of the class. Spirit boons are the unique mechanic of the Druid, allowing them to bond to different spirits in the game, providing them with unique passive bonuses that sometimes can change a build entirely. Tinkering with these spirit boons and adjusting them depending on what build you're playing is a huge part of playing the Druid build, and it can be really fun for those who love to min-max and tinker with builds, but might be a little tedious for those that just want to put something on autopilot and play. For survivability, Druids not only use barriers, but they also use the Fortify mechanic, not unlike the Barbarian and Necromancer, to prevent a lot of damage dealt to them, and while also increasing their damage at the same time. Playstyles available to the Druid are Werewolf, which allows them to shift into a very powerful werewolf that focuses on dealing critical damage and dealing damage over time with poisons. Poisons in this game stack, so it allows them to get a lot of damage over time on a lot of enemies simultaneously. Werebear, which is another melee-focused build that has a huge focus on overpower, dealing incredible burst damage, but doesn't have sustained DPS, meaning that you have very big spikes of damage, but you have very slow amounts of time in between those spikes. Then there's using nature magic between earth, lightning, and physical damage spells that deal damage from afar, allowing you to play as a pure caster while protecting yourself with barriers. And then lastly is a hybrid style of play where you mix and match spell casting with shapeshifting in the terms of werewolf or werebear, with some storm or nature skills allowing you to get the best of both worlds. The pros of this class are that they can summon companions not unlike the Necromancer, though to a lesser extent. They also have a wider variety of playstyles compared to some other classes in the game. They can reach exceptionally high damage late game if built correctly, and they are rather tanky compared to some other classes. The cons are that they can start out extremely slow compared to other classes, making them feel sluggish in the early parts of the game, primarily because spirit gain is hard to navigate when you're first learning the class, and this can give you a lot of downtime in between skills. Additionally, synergies between skills are not always inherently obvious, making trial and error a must for anyone playing a Druid build. Some of the playstyles available to the Druid are extremely legendary aspect dependent, so even though they seem like they would be good, if you don't have the right equipment, a lot of times they will underperform. And lastly, Druids have a limited amount of aspects due to having less equipment slots than Rogues and Barbarians. Barbarians are a strength-based melee class. They are perfect for people who like to fight up close and feel the power of their skills on the enemies they face, and there are no ranged weapons for the Barbarians, so you are forced to fight face to face. Players that enjoy the adrenaline of constantly taking and dealing damage while getting the satisfaction to destroy everything and move really fast will enjoy this character. Barbarians have very high health, and they also provide access to the Fortify mechanic, which relies on the amount of health you have versus the amount of damage you've taken. Players that enjoy managing their health will enjoy this mechanic, but others may feel it kind of dull and not rewarding. The main playstyles of Barbarians are Whirlwind Barbarian, and this allows you to quickly maneuver the battlefield to defeat big packs of enemies. It's very fun for users that mainly enjoy defeating multiple enemies at the same time, and don't like to stand in a single place. Instead of focusing on combinations of skills, you simply move around the battlefield using shouts and repositioning on the best place to maximize efficiency. Since this highly relies on your equipment, you'll get a feeling of constant improvement while you get stronger and stronger. Bleeding skills. This allows you to apply massive damage over time on enemies, allowing you to simply strike and run to the next thing while you see enemies die on their own. Players that enjoy hit-and-run style tactics will enjoy this playstyle. Combo style damage. This playstyle revolves around combining different skills and aspects to create powerful one-shot combos that annihilate enemy groups. The arsenal system also encourages swapping weapons between different skills to gain bonuses. It's perfect for players that enjoy combo mechanics of building up a skill and then unleashing a devastating blow, as well as for users that like to constantly swap between different skills. And lastly, the support playstyle. While not frequent for ARPGs, shouts allow barbarians to greatly boost companion abilities as well as taunting enemies and tanking them, which might be appealing to some users, although this is obviously not a meta thing. In short, the pros of this build are that it fights up close, it has the arsenal system which allows you to swap between many different weapons, allowing you to theory craft equipment, and has access to more weapon slots, thus more offensive legendary aspects. The cons are that it doesn't have ranged attacks, it has a rather slow start, and requires a considerable amount of character planning. We recommend the Whirlwind Barbarian for a good amount of fun and speed clearing with unique barb gameplay. Up next is the Rogue. The Rogue is a versatile dexterity and critical class. It's a very mobile character, and it's sort of a jack of all trades, as it can fight in melee or at range. It crowd controls enemies and debuffs them, as well as performing AoE and single target damage. Players that like constantly smashing buttons to quickly move through the battlefield and continuously casting skills will enjoy this style of play, while players that get confused by many buttons will hate it. Players that like to swap between different playstyles will be able to do so, as they can quickly respec from range to melee while keeping similar mechanics. Rogues have a very wide range of builds, but most of them are specific and require min-maxing, which negates the possibility to play around with them as much. Rogue has a somewhat higher skill cap compared to other classes to be played correctly, and will be more appreciated by users that want to be focused over players that enjoy chilling. Rogues don't have high health and have better dodge mechanics than other characters, as well as having some skills that greatly reduce damage taken. The best way to stay alive is to remain mobile and keep enemies crowd-controlled or far away. The specialization mechanic provides even more options, allowing you to swap between combo points, which enhances your main skills, inner sight, which forces you to attack specific enemies to build up a bar, and once that bar is full, you'll have a grace period to enjoy unlimited energy, and preparation, which reduces your ultimate cooldowns and resets other cooldowns while using ultimates. The main playstyles of this build are Shadow Imbuement, which imbues your attacks with a debuff that causes explosions, dealing a ton of AoE damage. This can be played both melee and ranged, and requires you to group up enemies to execute the explosion. Players that like setting up a combo and exploding it at the right time to kill everything in a single strike will enjoy this playstyle. Poison Imbuement deals very high damage in the form of poison, quickly dealing damage over time. Good against groups of enemies and even better against bosses, and players that enjoy damage over time to quickly deal with bosses will enjoy this build. Trapper. Set down traps on the battlefield that deal poison damage and burst damage in combination with crowd control skills to keep yourself safe. Players that like hit and run mechanics will enjoy this build. And burst crit damage. Either for melee, ranged, or hybrid, you can make burst DPS damage on single targets, take advantage of debuffs and passives. Players will need to constantly move through the battlefield to engage and disengage enemies, and players that like to kite will enjoy this playstyle. The pros of this class is that they're the jack of all trades. They have many options and can quickly transition from one build to another by respecking. They allow for a play style of ranged and melee, which most classes don't allow. They're very mobile, allowing you to quickly reposition yourself on the battlefield. They have many crowd control options as well as survivability options, and they have a good amount of equipment slots, allowing you to stack many offensive aspects. The cons are they are very narrow or specific builds. They require a lot of concentration to play. They require players to constantly move and smash keys, and depending on the build, it might have a very mechanic-heavy gameplay. So that wraps up our video on the best class for you, showing you some of the endgame footage of these classes, so you can sort of decide which direction you want to go with them, as well as explaining some of the ways you might play them. We will obviously have detailed videos for all of these.
But I'm gonna go shopping, get my groceries, do all that, and then I'll be back. I kind of want to do a Resident Evil 4 remake speedrun. I haven't done one in a while. See if I can still do it in under an hour and 50 minutes. But I haven't decided. But either way, I'll be back in a couple hours. So thanks for hanging out with me for this little short stream. And hopefully y'all are back in a little bit. And Drewby, thanks for the gift sub to Fritz. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you guys tonight. I'll be on a little bit later.